Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to Social Confoes. I'm your host Diego, together with my co-host Shanduk.
What a
Shanduk, how are you
smooth
doing?
opening today, Diego. What can I say? I'm
Smooth.
having a good day. Yeah. How about yourself?
Felt a little under the weather before, but nothing that a little sleep doesn't help. And in the topic of today, I think sleep will be also an important factor to
Okay.
consider. But before we get
Interesting.
into that, anyone who's tuning in, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Diego Amerali. And also, we recently launched our profile on Instagram at Confoes. You can find us there. It's still empty, but start following us. We are building up some stuff to keep you up to date. And
Be
Shanduk,
tuned. Be tuned for more. Be tuned for more. Yeah, I think rest is one of the things that is underestimated. I'm not necessarily thinking we're going into rest that much, but we can mention it as part of the topic because we're gonna talk about the work for yourself dream. So I think what's important for us to know is that from our perspective, at least I'm going to talk from my perspective. I'm not a first generation entrepreneur. So I do feel like I've been brought up with a different perception already. And if I remember correctly, you're not a first generation entrepreneur either. So does that give us an advantage or a disadvantage when it comes to the topic of working for yourself?
I think it's a bit of both. And on that topic, yeah, I can agree that we're both not first generational entrepreneurs, but our upbringings may differ also in the sense of my upbringing has been mostly, the regular you go to school, but I wasn't really ever much involved in the business side of things, but I was always offered the freedom to try stuff. So yes, it's an advantage, but on the other side, it doesn't have to be an advantage. You can also gain it through other avenues of your upbringing, through your social circles, your school. And one thing I do want to bring up with school education system, we are both from Freyateneum, right? And back then, or I'm not sure if you experienced the same, oftentimes that was seen as an elite school, or the school that goes to,
Was seen as like
it's
in the
still like
local
that.
context,
Yeah, in the local context, it's
maybe
very
maybe
particular.
not
Like,
worldwide or globally, but in a local
yeah,
context, definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
in the local context. But if you compare it, it's who do you meet at that school? Like, what group of people do you encounter? What families, what network do you encounter? And in that sense, you can compare it to the local aspect, but also if we zoom out globally,
Yeah.
the same applies to the leading schools like Harvard,
Yeah, I
MIT.
mean,
It's the network,
Like
yeah.
Ivy
So
League
basically,
universities is
that
pretty
that
much the same. Yeah.
that environment through your upbringing kind of also nudges you in certain directions. But coming back to the first generation entrepreneur, it can and it doesn't have to have its advantages, but I certainly can understand why you say you have certain advantages because you have been brought up more in that sense, correct?
But yeah, but still, just to counter that argument though, like if I would look back at my fellow classmates from high school, yes, the environment was often either to become a specialist or an entrepreneur. But if I would go back and I would take a school picture of a regular class, in general, I could go back to my yearbook. That there weren't people at that time thinking of I'm gonna become an entrepreneur.
No,
Like that was
I agree
and
with
I
that.
right? So it's if I would go to yearbook photos now, the majority would still be working for a company, right? That they don't necessarily own. So there is only a small percentage of people that are entrepreneurs. and but you do notice a significant rise over time, and especially now, even a conversation that I was having now, like people who have like a lot of corporate experience, just and we had a couple of them as guests on this podcast as well, that are just like, yeah, we're leaving the corporate
Yeah, people who have
cycle
completely pivoted and shifted careers.
as well. So you have people who kind of they've pivoted out of the corporate world and started from this for themselves in the same respective field or the specialization they have, because they're that good that different companies want to work with them. And you have people that ventured out to completely go towards their passion or something they're passionate about or more towards their ikigai. And then you also have people who just decide to start for themselves. And that's all those people are not necessarily second or third generation entrepreneurs either. So there's like a very big field. And I think because we opened a question, I think a couple of weeks ago, about are you an artist, Diego? Or do you see yourself as a designer even? And the same question can be asked here. Do you see yourself as an entrepreneur? And why would you
Well,
say so, yes or no?
well, let's look at. I think there's two definitions we need to define first, right?
Okay.
One, the origins of the word entrepreneur, and
Yeah.
two, like how it's interpreted and perceived today. So if you look at the origins of the word entrepreneur, it's basically, I think it's a French word to un, entreprendre, like to
Yeah.
undertake. Sorry, excuse my
Yeah.
French. I only
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
2 years of French in high school. Yeah,
Entrepreneur.
but
Yeah.
it's basically to
Yeah.
take action to undertake something in a business venture. So
Yeah.
basically, you're gonna found and take action to start your own thing. That is
Yeah.
the essence of entrepreneur. And as time has shifted, and especially the rise today with the quote unquote work for yourself dream, and entrepreneurship has been romanticized to a certain degree, I think.
Oh, you're jumping straight into it, aren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
I think a few of our previous past guests have had a similar opinion as well. But basically, it's been overhyped, it's been romanticized, it's been given associations that kind of exceed or embellish the initial origins of the word, as in, look, I founded so many companies. Look, I'm doing things on my own. Especially now, influencers. Look, this is the rich lifestyle of an entrepreneur driving Lambos,
So
etc.
so can
So
you are they intertwined? Is like working for yourself and being an entrepreneur the same thing? Do you feel that it's the same thing? Do you separate the two of them?
I don't. What is it? I don't think they're. I think they can be mutually exclusive, but there are overlaps. So, entrepreneur, looking back at the origins,
Yeah.
is to undertake a business, and it doesn't have to be your own, because a very popularized term nowadays is also
As entrepreneur, yeah.
entrepreneurs. Yeah,
Yeah.
be undertaking action or undertaking a project within a bigger business. So it's the art of undertaking, if we're going into definitives. And if you bring that to working for yourself, so what does working for yourself mean? Is that meaning you're not beholden to responsibility to a employer, to
That's the
someone,
funny thing. You're
or is
always
it,
you
yeah,
always have accountability. So that's the funny thing about it,
or is it
right?
at a transactional level that your income goes straight to you or to your business and not necessarily to a extra chain uh, of flow. So there's different aspects to look at it. How do you see it?
I would say work for yourself means that um, you kind of get to decide,
So the
right?
decision
Every
making
aspect,
aspects.
yeah,
Yeah.
every aspect of whether it's the financial side, which clients you get, or which projects you take on. You work for yourself, so you're basically accountable for yourself. But then again, you don't have accountability towards someone senior,
Right.
because you have accountability to your clients. I mean, so and I think I'm not fairly 100% sure, but I would say all entrepreneurs work for themselves. But I'm not sure that everybody that works from themselves is an entrepreneur. I'm not sure if um, you could fully put a freelancer under the
I
term
was about to
entrepreneur.
throw that term to you. Like, where would you put freelancer
Yeah,
in
so that
that?
makes it difficult
That
because a
So wait,
freelancer does work
where would you
for
put?
them.
I want
Yeah.
to throw another one. So
Okay.
we discussed entrepreneur and working for yourself in a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And then where would you put freelancer and where would you put business owner?
So first of all, when you talk about business owner, are you what size is the business are you talking about?
So
Right?
that's another thing, right?
Right? So that makes it difficult already, and it also depends on what's your focus as an entrepreneur. Because I feel like we in Dutch we have different terms, and one of the terms for the entrepreneur is just being on their own. Like it's a personal business, right? So you
Yeah,
don't
so
have
so
any
proprietary.
employees. Yeah, so proprietary. Yeah, you don't have anyone that you're paying salaries to, or and in a sense that's also entrepreneurship, right? Like
Yeah,
if
but
you're
I disagree. Like
yeah
basically the biggest entrepreneurs have built empires and they started so many different things. But you
yeah,
had
but does
some examples.
scaling does if you're not scaling your business, does that mean that you're not an entrepreneur?
No,
Okay, could you elaborate?
not scaling your business doesn't have to mean you're not an entrepreneur because then we come to the definition of a business owner, but also do you need to scale? Why do you need to scale? Why do you want to
So
scale?
or why do you want to scale, right?
Yeah.
So if you
But
decide to become an entrepreneur or start working for yourself because you want to better the world and you don't see organizations that fit your vision of
so
how you can make the world a better place,
so and
yeah,
making the world a better place doesn't have to fall under entrepreneurship.
no, it doesn't either. You could very well become an employee of a
Yeah.
company.
So coming
So
back to the
yeah,
origins of the word entrepreneur is basically just undertaking a action for a business, for a for-profit something, and of course you can do it in a non-profit fashion. But at the end
yeah.
of the day, you need to create or do something that generates an income to sustain
So
your life.
there's an interesting conversation that we've also had, like in different groups or different uh, discussion with different people, and that's like Gary Vaynerchuk once famously said in an Ask Gary Fee
Yeah,
that, and I took
I think I
offense
know.
to it.
I
Yeah,
think
I
I
took offense
remember
to it
what
at the
you're going
time.
at.
That
Right.
he's saying like, listen, if you get a
If you're
salary each
working, yeah.
month, if you're working for a boss and I get a salary each month, you're not an entrepreneur. Like people were like, how could you say that? And he's like, listen, if you're really an entrepreneur, a real entrepreneurs know what it's like to have a business and pay others, but not being able to pay
Basically, you
yourself.
have full accountability and you accept all the risk associated with it.
Yes, so there's a lot of risk association, and like if you've never experienced a situation where at the end of the month you didn't the only source of income would be from your business and not having a salary from another job, that's what differentiate. And I'm not sure if I'm botching like how he explained it because I feel like I'm botching it a bit, but the idea was simple. If you work for a company or for somebody and you get a salary each month, that doesn't that you're not a true entrepreneur. A true entrepreneur only kind of
Yeah, there's
works for
definitely
themselves.
nuances, I
Yeah.
think, to that explanation he gave. But I think the way Gary Vee delivers his messages is very
Yeah,
radical, right?
it has to be very radical to
Yeah,
get a point across. But
exactly.
it makes total sense. So in that perspective, I feel
Because
like
yeah,
yeah,
the risk aspect, basically with anything is very important, basically, or is oftentimes overlooked or underestimated because you
But
are
I think there's
accountable
some value in that. I
in
think that
what
there's some
exactly?
value in it.
In not taking the risk or
In
taking a
Yeah, and taking the risk because you think differently. Like you do think differently when there's a situation that you could go bankrupt as a company versus like if it's not going well, I still have my salary.
right.
It's like it's a different situation.
So coming back, before you made the switch, remind me, how was this? Was the switch for you gradual, or was it? Were you ever in a window period that you didn't have a uh, predictable income?
Yeah, so definitely. Um, the reason I got upset by what Gary Vaynerchuk mentioned is because at the time I was still working full time and for another company. And while I had the entrepreneurial tendencies, while people a lot of people thought that the company that I was working for was actually my company, that I had stock in the or shares in the company, which I didn't, uh, because of the way that I profiled myself, in the sense that I did consider it being my business, even though I didn't own the business. I felt if you work for a company, that's your company. Like you have that responsibility. It's not like
Yeah.
okay, I'm getting paid and it's their company,
So
so
in
I
your
just
case,
do what they say.
basically,
Yeah,
the mindset was already there, but applied to said
yeah,
company.
yeah. But the biggest, I wouldn't call it an issue. It's valuable to have, and in other senses, it makes it harder to work within the corporate environment. Is that I at that time already for over 25 years had been pushed towards entrepreneurial tendencies by my own father. So for my mom, I think my mother's most important thing was like, you have to study and you have to graduate. You have to get your degree. My dad looked at it from a totally different perspective. He was like, you have to experience how the world works out of sight of where you were being raised. Like you have to at least experience different parts of the world and see the differences between the Europe and South America and the Caribbean and the US, and understand how different these societies are, and how you have to adapt to change and to culture and
Right.
environment. And then on top of that, wherever we would go, he would always approach things from an entrepreneurial perspective. So if he would go on a vacation and we would be in a restaurant, he would be talking about the service, the quality of the food,
Mm.
what could be better, what was really good, and everything.
Basically, identifying the gaps,
Identifying
the
like the
good, the
gaps,
bad.
processes, and I wasn't very much aware of it. Um, but there are interesting things that um, my dad once went to a seminar in the U.S., and he came back and he was, listen, you know that book, the book that you're using for one of your courses. The authors of that book were being discussed at
Which
that
book was that?
conference. The Experience Economy, Pine and Gilmore.
Okay,
Have you read that one?
haven't heard of it,
Pretty, pretty,
but
pretty
I
cool book. Yeah.
imagine a bit.
So when it comes to leisure studies, especially Pine and Gilmore and the Experience Economy was a pretty big deal like 20 years ago. And what made it so exceptional is that they discussed the change from a commodity to a product to an experience.
Mm.
So the best example that I can give from it is when I was in San Diego for the very first time. I went into a Nike store and I was looking for a running shoe. And the guy said, and I couldn't decide between the different shoes. And he said, like, these are shoes for if you're a really stable runner, like an experienced runner. And these are shoes for people that they don't have a proper balance. So when they run, They need kind
Yeah,
of
some
support
support. Yeah,
because otherwise they're gonna twist their ankle or get a knee injury or something like that. And then you had like the in between one between the experienced running shoe and the beginner shoe. And he put me on a treadmill. So he's like, okay, you can run on this treadmill. And he filmed with an iPad while I was running on the treadmill. And we briefly discussed like what he saw based on the film, the way I was running. And based on that, we made the decision which shoe I would go for. That's basically just an experience. From the commodities perspective,
yeah.
I
It's
just
a shoe.
need
You bought a shoe.
footwear. I just need
Yeah,
footwear, right? And then from a product perspective, it goes a little bit further as getting the right shoe that's the right fit. But then from an experience perspective, I almost felt that I couldn't leave the store without buying a shoe.
yeah. Like the whole sales closing is basically the
Yeah,
experience
it's
kind
the
of close the deal.
experience, right? And it's and to show you how driven that experience is, and then we get to entrepreneurship as well, to give you an idea how important that experience is the reviews. Like if you go to a certain hotel or you use a certain Uber driver, it's all about the reviews, especially Uber in the US. If you use an Uber, you always basically you want the drivers that are like 4 stars and up. You want a 5 star
Yeah,
driver would be
4.5 stars and up.
yeah 4.5 stars and up. And it's also the experience, like how well is the person able to communicate with you. Can they solve a problem for you? For instance, you're late. What kind of music do they have, like in the car? So all of a sudden, it's just not a mode of transport anymore. It's also it has to be a mode of transport that provides a
Like
positive
suits your needs. Yeah,
experience.
it
So
enhances your travel,
so
your
and
commute.
so these kind of things, when I studied these kind of things, I looked at it from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Well, Jean-Luc takes a sip, and yeah, you got that nudge from your father basically at that time to kind of start identifying certain aspects or certain tendencies, right? Coming back to your example of getting raised up in that family. In my case, I just I wasn't much directed in that way. I basically kind of just fell into it. I didn't even try the
But
corporate side.
so here's the interesting thing. Before you tell a little bit more on because I do want to have a little bit of background because I got the entrepreneurial tendencies. I was kind of groomed into it, but I wasn't allowed to work at my dad's companies as a teenager.
Mm.
And that had a very simple rule. One of the reasons was that I would I wouldn't get the real working experience.
It's that safety factor,
Yeah,
I
but it's
think,
also
coming.
like, yeah, people are not gonna be they're gonna be afraid to give feedback because I'm the son of the owner.
Yeah,
So he never put me in a situation where, even though later in life these kind of situations still happen, but I started working at the age of 12, I think, selling fireworks. And I only did vacation jobs. And then I stayed a year. I took a leap year to get a little bit more experience, work experience. So what I find extra interesting is that you actually never
I
really
never.
took the route
I
of,
No, but basically to add to that, I actually
yeah,
never had that part-time job experience in my
yeah,
teenage years either. So it was basically school home for me. So I
yeah.
wasn't exposed to that at all. So I'm kind of like the complete opposite of the spectrum. If we have that spectrum from experiencing and these tendencies,
But that's an
having part-time
extreme amount of
jobs.
freedom,
Yeah.
right? And to what extent was that freedom given because you kind of obeyed the focus that was given by the providers, in this case, your parents?
Well, there wasn't much of a focus, I'd say. Look, I performed well in school with very little effort. So that was yeah, I was one of those kids like with minimal studying and basically get one
So,
of the
so yeah,
highest
you were
grades in the
smart.
class. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that came in easy for me, and so I spent a lot of my time like um, I wasn't even much into reading back then, but if I had to read stuff for school, yes, I did the reading, but I found creative ways around it as well, and uh, to read summaries or watch movies, and basically kind of I remember what I did like was solving problems. Basically, I deliberately didn't study for a math class, one of the matrix formulas, and I remember this quite vividly. During the test, I knew two concepts and I had to construct the solution through those two concepts. And I took a different route than was taught in the actual class. And I got to the right answer. And I was
But
like,
did you get all the points though?
I don't remember, but
Because
I
I had a
scored pretty
similar
high.
experience,
Yeah,
and I
because
didn't
I
get,
scored pretty high.
but I didn't get the points.
Yeah.
So I
So,
had the same experience as you had, but not as good because I didn't get all the points. And when I went to the math teacher and I was like, hey, but I got the same result. You say, yeah, but the method doesn't work because I used a different method. And I was like, hey, but the result is the same. And he said, do it with this and this number. And I did the equation with those numbers and it didn't match. I was like,
yeah,
damn
okay.
it.
In that case, yeah. But
But in
I
your
don't
case,
remember
it might have
exactly.
actually
Yeah, I
it
don't
might have
remember.
actually still worked.
Yeah, but again, in that case, I wasn't also the kid that went to, to debate or discuss much. I like, oh, okay, that's a great. And after the test scores are received, you see kids line up to try to get that perfect score or just that point one, so it rounds up easier. But
Oh
I
no,
didn't.
I just went because I felt I had the right answer, but I didn't choose the right way to solve it.
Yeah, but
So yeah.
coming back to that extreme, yeah. So I had that freedom to try a lot of stuff. My mom put me through, I think, taekwondo. I did swimming lessons. I did archery for a time, but these are just not even work related stuff or career related stuff. So that support and freedom I did have, and I think what I took away from that upbringing is, you know, um, I also think that's where that value of freedom for me comes from, right? Uh, Valuing that ability to do things you want, and I would say, I guess that's kind of pushed me in the direction of the regular 9 to 5 in a cubicle or in a office building is kind of crazy, and I've tried for some projects. I go to the client's office for maybe half a day, and by the halfway mark, like maybe 3 hours in, I start to lose it. And I'm like, okay, I need to go do something else.
So this is interesting because in this sense we're opposite.
Yeah,
As an so I started out when I came back from my studies. I started out as an entrepreneur, and the reason why I took a day job because I founded two or three startups before I took a quote unquote day job. And I only took the day job because of a personal situation that I had to go back to the Netherlands. And I had to have an actual job to
yeah. Okay,
apply
so
to go
that's
back.
out of necessity to kind
So,
of
but one of the
a
reasons
means
I
to an
found
end.
it interesting is because I went as a intern to be able to apply for a visa for the Netherlands because I didn't apply for. I had the opportunity to apply for a migrant workers visa when I graduated because I did my master's degrees in Europe.
Yeah,
So I actually had, but I left that because I wanted to go back to Suriname. And so when I had to go back uh, to the Netherlands, I had to apply for a visa and I had to work somewhere. So I took an internship. And when I took the internship, it was just to learn the skills that were necessary for me to get the visa. And once I got the visa, sorry, yeah. So once I got the visa, um, I actually came back as an interim manager to set up a business, help set up a business for 6 months, and then kind of leave and start on my own again. And I ended up staying 5 years. And the reason why I ended up staying 5 years was the camaraderie of having colleagues. So,
Mm.
as an extrovert or a mainly extroverted person, sitting all alone by myself in that time was like the most grueling thing to have. Like, and
Yeah. So
working in an office
in
space
that
with
aspect,
10, 15 colleagues was for me the easiest decision was like, yeah, I want to experience this.
see, that's the other aspect in which we kind of differ in extreme opposites. Well, extreme not so much, but yeah, in opposite directions. So it's really interesting to hear this again, actually, in this context, having these comparisons and coming back to the topic of entrepreneurship and the work for yourself dream. We've kind of both came to a similar or parallel path. And when we opened this, we also discussed, right, or posed the question like, why is it so hype now? Why is it so romanticized now? Where does this dream come from? Is it out of necessity? Is it out of what the influencers paint on social media? Is it out of, I don't know, the economic situation? So how do you see that now?
I want
Where
to
does,
differentiate between two things. I want to
yeah.
differentiate between economic and societal changes that has built the landscape for entrepreneurship as we know it now. And I also want to paint the picture of why I think certain aspects are overhyped. So, which do we want to start off with first?
Let's start with the overhyped and then transition to the
Okay,
societal
so
and
so
economic context.
the first thing, it's a buzzword. I think we can agree on that. Like,
You know
it's
what's an
just
even
being.
you know what's an even bigger buzzword than entrepreneur?
Tell me.
Founder.
Oh yeah, yeah. I found it something. Oh, I found it a lot. Like most of what I found it is quite useless to be honest. But yeah. So but the entrepreneurship is kind of getting a lot of attention. Like, I mean, like you're an entrepreneur, but how much does your company make in a year, right? Or how valid is what you're providing? So, and that's also the second part of value creation, right? Like how important is value creation? And I think there's a difference there. But let's stick to the overhyped part. It's definitely glamorized the entrepreneurial journey uh, because like there are certain books, and I think one of the main books is Rich Dad Poor Dad, which kind of discusses like the economic benefits of entrepreneurship, and that makes people think like, oh, okay, so if I'm an entrepreneur, I'm gonna make so much more money. So that's also like it's not the book doesn't use that philosophy in that way,
So
but I
it's
do
funny
feel
that you
it's getting misinterpreted.
yeah, so it's funny that you
Yeah,
mentioned the rich dad poor dad in the context of entrepreneurship because maybe it is related, but when I read it, like maybe 10, 15 years ago by
yeah,
now. No, not 15. Yeah, probably 10,
yeah,
10 or 12 years. It was more about the aspect of, you have your rich dad and your poor dad, basically their perspectives on how they view money as in a tool or as a consumption thing.
yeah.
And I think that kind of triggered a lot of people to start thinking how can they use money as a tool or how can they create something
Yeah,
that generates.
and
So
that's what I
I
don't
think
like.
that's
Yeah.
the
So the
more of the hype.
misinterpretation,
Yeah.
because I'm pretty sure that it wasn't meant to be viewed that way, but in a society that we live now, where the monetary and the financial importance is quite high at this all-time high, um, because people seek towards financial independence, which is a different topic. But the reason it's so popularized is because of the importance of money. And because there's a misconception about entrepreneurship being about money, which it isn't. Like if you look at Start with a Why from Simon Sinek, you get a totally different approach. If you so I think there's a big difference between people who are young, growing up, wanting to become an entrepreneur because they can make more money in their
Right.
perception, and people who are actually moving away from the corporate field because
To
it's
do.
becoming so diluted with money making decisions that they're like, but this is not what I'm about, and start their own business or become an entrepreneur to steer away specifically from those money making decisions because
And
they feel like,
basically
yeah,
apply their talents to what they're good at, right? To
yes,
solving, maybe you want to do yoga or something. So
yeah,
solving that kind of mental gap that you find in many people, having suffered yourself through that corporate environment or
it's
something
the
similar.
same. It's the same with the 4 hour work week. It's like when people touch upon that, and if they skip through the book, they're like, yeah, okay, so I'm gonna not work 9 to 5 anymore. But then, and their focus is on working as less as possible. But I think there's so many more messages in the book. And I feel that's the same with Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's like, okay, yes, of course, you can build up a better pension for yourself if you're an entrepreneur. You could. It doesn't
Okay,
mean
so
you do. Yeah,
no, I'm gonna refrain from bringing that
yeah.
up
Right.
because that's the other topic.
Yeah. So that's but and so that's what you get as well. And then also the success stories always overshadow failures.
Oh yeah,
Like
it's like
for every
one to a
dozen
thousand. Yeah,
failures,
one to a thousand.
entrepreneurial failures. So that's why they have like these F up nights now that you kind of, yeah, this is my screw up and this is what I did wrong. And I got approached like years ago to be part of one of these F up nights. And I was like, yeah, but I don't have one F up, right? I think my story is that I had like 10 F ups, and they're all small F ups and journeys and things that I've learned. I don't have one that I regret, that I think like, oh, I wish I've never done that. I don't have that.
Okay,
But
so
yeah,
question on that on the
yeah.
FOP side, and maybe we're gonna uh, divert too much, but if I do, reel me back into this topic. So we mentioned risk, and aside from the failure, the risk
Yeah.
of failure and the risk that's associated with entrepreneurship in the beginning. So would you consider yourself more risk averse or risk taking?
So I definitely take more risks than others. Like if I didn't take any risks, there would be no social media conference,
Mm.
Suriname. It wouldn't exist. But I do take less risk than my dad, for instance. I like my risks to be calculated in a way that I feel comfortable in them. And I think every entrepreneur does that. But my comfort level is not as big as like the entrepreneurs that make the big
And
companies.
when you calculate this risk, what do you weigh in? Like, what's the potential drawdown that you're willing to accept or be comfortable with, be it economically, reputationally, or just
So when I take a risk, and I think it helps that my business partners are kind of similar to how I approach things. I'm more risk taking than they are often. They're more conservative than I am. But the thing about risk is like, let's say we're investing in something. Yes, we will buy a car for one of our managing partners, for instance, like a company owned car, right? Or at
yeah.
least a company finance car. Let me say it correct. Company finance car. Um, I'm only willing to take the risk for the down payment if I'm 100% sure that we will be able to cover it financially. So I can take that risk if the salaries for May or June of this year can be paid.
Yeah, so it's
I won't be able.
basically you need to project it and
You have
you're
to you have to do a projection. Is it possible within the projection? Is there a buffer? How much buffer do you need? Like those are kind of risks that I'm willing to take. Like pre-financing stuff for my team that I feel is important for them, or they tell us is important to them. I think that's something that you can do.
And let's say in the
But
case of the conference, like what are some risks there that you had to weigh?
so the biggest risk at the conference, especially the first one, is you don't know how many attendees you're gonna have.
Yeah,
So if you
because
spend,
there's no precedence yet, right? So you don't
so
have.
there are a lot of events organizers in Suriname that, oh, they go all out, and the advantage that they have is when the event is super successful,
Yeah, the upside
they
is.
make tons of
Yeah.
money. They make loads of money, right? And sometimes they bomb out and they have to go into their own pocket. I don't like to go into my own pocket. So I would bootstrap. So, for instance, if there would be a budget, say there's a budget of $50,000 for the conference, right? And I'm already foreshadowing that we're only gonna have like 40,000 worth of revenue. I will scale down the conference towards $40,000 of costs, and I will strip and I would bootstrap the hell out of it, right? And you do take some risk because the first conference we didn't know financially what we would entail. So for the first conference, we, I would say broke even, but if you would count in the hours of our team into it, logistics wise, organizing event, doing the marketing, there would have been a loss on the
Yeah.
spot.
So basically, all the external costs broke
Yeah,
even, but
if you would properly budget it,
yeah,
you would come to a small loss, not a significant loss, but a small loss, right? And then it grew from there, and we've and it's also kind of, we try to keep the prices reasonable. Like for instance, if conferences that we go to, like conferences that I've been to, like San Diego now, social media marketing world, it's between $1,500 and $2,000 a
yeah.
person for a ticket, right? Um, Inbound content marketing world, similar events in the US that are on my
Mm.
interest list, they're all above 1,000 US easily. And we keep the prices to a couple of $100. And if you buy early, you can get it even cheaper. So these are decisions that we have to make. I can't fully disclose all the details, but if we realize that the budget, we're not be able to cover the budget, we have to scale down. And where the entrepreneurial side comes in is finding creative ways around it to make it possible. Like, for instance, getting a world renowned keynote speaker to Suriname. We can pay 20,000 US dollars
Yeah,
for a
exactly.
speaking fee. So you have to be creative. And that's where the creative entrepreneurial part kicks into, like, how can we get somebody that has $20,000 as an international speaking fee to speak in Suriname? How can we make that possible? Right. And that's basically where you have to leverage. We had a lot of sponsors and partners coming in with costs that you usually wouldn't be able to cover, but they covered them for us as in return for sponsor perks, for instance. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where you have to start. But I mean, that's one approach. The other approach would be to say, like, listen, if I have 750 US dollars per ticket, I only need a third of the people to join the conference, and we have financially the same result.
Yeah, but then
But
you think like, what's the impact, right?
and that's
Uh,
where I feel like it's being overhyped. As soon as you start doing it for the money, like, we don't host the social media conference here now for the money. We host the social media conference because we want to have a conference where like-minded people can get together and network and have fun. That's the main concept. So if I have to choose between having 400 attendees for an average of $150 versus having 80 attendees for an average of $750, I would always go for the 400 participants because I want to have as many people experience as possible. Because most people don't have the budget to go to the US or to Europe to experience a similar conference. So I want the same quality for less money available for a larger group of people. That's our objective. And when it's being romanticized, like, oh wow, this is so awesome, and then everybody wants in because everybody's like, oh, we're gonna make a lot of money with this conference, and they see the budget and they're like, okay, but are you paying yourself? And then people are realizing like, okay, that's different, or they're like, okay, but if I don't benefit from it, I'm not gonna
Yeah,
do it.
but I assume
Financially benefit from it.
not just for you, but also the people attending. There has been a lot of spin-offs from just attending the conference
Oh
and
yes,
people
yes,
meeting. So
definitely.
basically, if you look
Yeah,
at the reward, risk
yeah.
reward, the risk, I mean, the reward isn't immediately at the conference, but the spin-off of that reward is maybe tenfold
So
or maybe a sustainable.
here's an interesting food for thought. So, for instance, Social Media Examiner, who organizes social media marketing world, the events are basically the revenue model. So they don't, as much as we do, work with these companies as clients. So that's also where it becomes difficult because we're now kind of moving towards year-round planning and preparation towards the conference, but we still have our regular clients, and we can say to our regular clients like, "Hey, for the next 3 weeks, we won't be able to serve you because we're busy with the conference." So you can't do that because that's still our main focus. Like the
Yeah,
main source of income for our company is still the monthly clients that we have. It's not the conference. So there's also a business model where you could say like, okay, but I'm going to focus solely and mainly on the conference. But that's a different kind of model, and that's something that's different. And I think where it goes wrong is that event organizers, they focus on like, oh, I can make a lot of money. And if they solely do it for the money and not really focus on the attendees and what the attendees want, you kind of lose them.
yeah,
I
it's a
mean,
one-time thing.
even with us looking at what the attendees want, we even lose attendees just because financially they're not able to pull it off. Their day job doesn't allow it, or they're too busy, um, or even like the program is not exciting enough for them. They want a different kind of speakers. Like we address all these issues, but we're not always able to find a fit for everyone. So these are really things that you have to deal with. But getting a little bit back to like why it's becoming overrated, I think there's also a concept of overnight success. Like people
Yeah,
see a certain
it's what
success
they
and they're
see.
like, yeah, they see like it's, we all know the painting of the like the tip of the iceberg, and then you see everything that goes down there.
Yeah,
And
basically the company that sold for $1 billion,
yeah,
having built up over 15
yeah.
years maybe, and then the timing just happens to be right. And the other myth is, I think, since we're bringing that up, you brought in overnight success. How much does the concept of luck play a role in entrepreneurship and having a successful undertaking?
How much I think perseverance is more important than luck. I think perseverance is much more important than luck.
Right, because if you persevere long enough, that opportunity will cross your path. That
Yeah, it
serendipitous
depends. Like
moment.
with what intent? Like
Yeah,
it also depends. Yeah, unfortunately, like persevering scammers are also quite successful sometimes.
yeah.
So that it's got both ways.
So
But
would you could you argue that these persevering scammers are also entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't take them on the right spectrum, but
Yeah, morally not correct, but
no,
basically,
no, but like if you catch, do you remember the movie Catch Me If You Can with
yeah,
Leonardo
yeah, yeah.
DiCaprio and Tom Hanks?
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, it's interesting. He was definitely an entrepreneur. Like he was like, I wouldn't call it like a legitimate business, but he could consider himself an entrepreneur. For those of you who are less familiar, you should definitely
It's a good.
take a look at the movie because it's very interesting. It's like they could do a remake of that with the digital age, definitely, like easily take to do that. But yeah, I definitely don't want to go that down that rabbit hole. But I do feel like we get to see so much overnight success. And it's interesting to see like a lot of people see Mr. Beast making videos now and think like, yeah, I want to become like Mr. Beast.
When did Mr. Beast start his YouTube?
I have a I'm really hoping it's still on there. Mr. Beast has a YouTube video of him when he was a teenager,
Yeah,
which he sent to himself like a certain amount of years from now. And he said, like, if by that time I don't have 1 million subscribers, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like he was like saying, like, it has to be like if 10 years, I don't know exactly how many years he said, or how many years to how much older Mr. Beast he was talking about. At
yeah.
that
He
time he was
started
saying
in
like
2012, so over a decade ago.
so Mr. Beast has already been on YouTube for over 10 years. And like there's very few YouTubers and you can
And
rise a
I
lot
gotta
quicker
say,
now.
I actually only heard of Mr. Beast in the past 2 years,
Yeah, when he kind of really blew up.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I started watching his content when he was actively campaigning for PewDiePie to remain number one on YouTube. Yeah, because he was like one of PewDiePie's biggest fans. For years, he was one of PewDiePie's biggest fans. And then all of a sudden, he started, but the YouTube channel is really a business now. He's already been offered $1 billion for his YouTube channel.
yeah, because the reach, the
Yeah.
impact he
And
has.
he rejected it. And I think David made a calculation of what it was worth, and it was already worth way much more than that. And then we're not talking about all the other channels that he has because he now has. So that's another thing about entrepreneurship. What Mr. Beast did was insane. So people started copying his content in other countries, like exactly the same content, exactly the same thumbnail. And instead of continuously, he whined about it a little bit in the beginning, but instead of continuously whining about it, like, hey, he started setting up separate channels in different languages. Mr. Beast Espanol, Mr. Beast, so different languages.
Basically taking covering those markets
And
as well.
kind of taking like
Adapting.
their market share out of it because then people are like, oh yeah, they're originally so in those countries now they also know like okay, but they're originally Mr. Beast videos, so
Senor Beast.
yeah, so you can no longer copy it either. So I think that's brilliant. Um, the Feastables is also brilliant. I mean, you can get his chocolate bars like in mainstream stores in the US as well. So I think that's definitely and the idea to build like a Hollywood type of studio. He basically built a Hollywood type of
Yeah, the
studio
warehouse, basically,
just
inside the
for
warehouse,
YouTube videos.
immense.
So yes,
And
but
on some
when
of
people see that,
productions, I watch a few videos on
yeah,
some production. They even lose millions of dollars of money just for the production, but the views and the basically
yeah,
the reach they get
yeah.
basically gets offset by the other types of products
I
or
mean,
business
he's
he does.
all of his YouTube videos are trending. All of them end up in trending, and he also so he changed the concept from weekly postings to monthly postings, and he just puts a banger out every month.
Yeah, he puts it all in. He
Yeah,
basically cracked the code to the algorithm and optimizes social media thumbnails and everything. So as we wrap up, we got a few minutes left. You mentioned two categories. The other aspect was the societal and economic impact it has on this hype of entrepreneurship. So
Yeah, so
short
it's a lot.
short take on that.
So it's a lot. So um, when I asked ChatGPT, basically, I'm gonna tell you what ChatGPT gave me, and then we can discuss which sounds more interesting. Because for that, we don't need ChatGPT, but it was good to get like a bullets of it. So the first one is economic recession and job insecurity. That drove people towards entrepreneurship. The second one is technological advancements and digital transformation. The third one is, I think, most interesting one: the access to information and online resources. I feel that's my main focus when it comes to entrepreneurship. The fourth one is rise of social media influencer culture. Um, the fifth one is shift in work culture and values. Also, very interesting one. Sixth is the more supportive startup ecosystem, which I don't fully agree with, but I do understand that it works for Western
Yeah, I
countries.
have to kind of
Yeah,
if you on that one.
yeah.
The from the ones you mentioned,
Okay,
like
and then two more: changing attitudes towards failures. That's a really interesting one, and an increasing desire for purpose and impact. And that's kind of a generational one. So there are a lot
yeah,
of interesting ones.
I think the biggest ones from what you mentioned there is the way I see it, at least the access to information with the internet and social
Yeah,
media. Just the sheer amount of more exposure you get to these things is crazy. And then adjacent to that is obviously the influencer social media stuff. And the other aspect that's interesting was that of the generational work culture
yeah.
shift that's been happening.
So that's a big one. I think, have we discussed that one on the podcast already?
Briefly mentioned, but I don't think we went too in depth. But we don't have time to go much
Yeah.
in depth unless you want to go over today.
So, but in short, you have the boomer generation, Generation Y, X, which is considered the millennial generation, and Generation Z, so the fourth one. So basically, there are four generations now on the work floor, right?
Yeah, boomers, XYZ,
Yeah,
and the Z's are just
XYZ.
getting in, and
The Z's are just getting in,
they've
and
been
they have,
brought up in the internet social media age.
yeah,
So
but that doesn't make them tech savvy.
no,
So I think
they're
that's
the
also
most
miss.
influenced by, I'd say, mainstream media and to a certain degree entitlement.
Yeah, so they are definitely the most entrepreneurial minded in the sense that they want to work for themselves, seeking independence, right? So that's definitely. I also feel they're much more money driven, as in incentives. Unless, and I had a really big discussion on this with my team actually last Friday. I asked my team if they would rather have $200 or 100, or so option A was $200, and the other option was $100 and a voucher for $200. And basically everyone in my team, it also depended on the voucher,
Yeah, of course.
but
Have you heard of
everybody in my
the?
team was saying like, yeah, we'll take the $200 cash. And it was like, but the other one is $300. And they were like, yeah, but it's $200 cash. And I was like, listen, you could sell the voucher with a loss of $50 to anyone, and you would have still had $50 extra. And they were like, yeah, but the work that I have to put in to find somebody to buy it. And I was just astounded because
It's
I
the
look at it from a totally different
yeah,
perspective.
it's basically the marshmallow test. Are you familiar with the marshmallow test?
Do explain. Do explain.
Basically, it was a test on seeing how about delaying gratification, basically. So they put, I think, kids in a room or offered them marshmallows either now or they take it now, so to immediately eat it, or they delay it and maybe after a few days or later time they get an extra one because they delayed their gratification. And it's interesting to see that over time the time horizon of people has gotten shorter to immediate, and that comes with the impact that I think social media has created, this instant gratification, the dopamine, the now, now, now.
Yeah, it's definitely instant gratification. Another thing that's also trust. Like, how much do you trust? With a marshmallow, for instance, how much do you trust that you're really gonna get it? And like,
And that
employees have
comes
been
with
screwed
risk,
over.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but also
that comes with
employees
risk.
have been screwed over quite a lot in like previous decades. So there's also a situation where
Look
they're
at
like,
pensions
and
now.
people, yeah, and like people telling them like, hey, don't take that risk, don't take that risk, don't take this, take the money now, take it, then you have it, then it's yours. So that also plays
So
into it.
if
Yeah,
you would have asked me that question, I would have also took the $200 now because I
yeah.
can do something better with the $200 now than the
No, but
voucher.
I didn't say now. I was just saying $200 or $100 and a $200 voucher.
Yeah.
Like for me, like my perception, and I really had to
So
empathize with them to understand their point of view on it. And I learned from it and understood it. But for me, $100 and $200 voucher is $300. The only thing is you have to be creative on how do I benefit from the
yeah.
voucher.
So it's basically a calculation, risk calculation that you're gonna make with a time basis as well, like the time frame you're gonna go through it, and the, as they said, effort and
Yeah,
what you're gonna
and they
do
had a fair
to achieve
point.
it.
So a lot of them were like, yeah, but if it was a different voucher, yes, but this voucher, no. So that played a role.
Yeah.
And another thing that played a role was taxes as well, right? If you have to pay for the extra $100, you have to pay a certain amount of taxes.
Basically
Then
what the lotteries have. If you see a million
yeah,
dollar lottery, like they don't, the people don't get $1 million, people.
no, but these are like things that you have to discuss. And I also feel like when it comes to overhype, but that's the often the generation C. But now you also have like the main difference between the millennials and Gen X is also that the millennials have definitely said like, okay, I want quality of life over state of life. And we're seeing a movement within even the Generation X saying like, hey, wait, yeah, I want that as well. Them seeing like, hey, like it's nice. If I can work here, I can have X amount of vacations, I can drive a nice car. I have some certain benefits that are for my state of life, they're important. But then
Could you
realizing, yeah, but quality.
quickly
Okay.
define those two briefly, and then we can close up? State
Yeah.
of life and quality of life. What's the
So state
differentiating
of
factor
life,
between these two?
for me, the differentiating factor between state of life and quality of life is the mental aspect and having to do things you like doing.
So that's state of life.
So if you're like, I want to focus on state of life, it's more status driven. So you'll accept a little bit more to keep a certain state of life.
Okay, yeah.
Whereas the millennials will be like, yeah, but there's so many other options. I'm just not gonna do this. It's not worth it for me. I'm just leaving. The
I'm gonna
status,
take two
the
months
state of life is not
vacations
worth it.
instead of 3 days vacation for the position.
I'll just take one vacation instead of three. I'll just drive around in a $10,000 car instead of a $40,000 car. At the end of the day, it's a mode of transport. I don't really
Yeah,
care about
what's the
people
added
that
value? Yeah.
yeah, I don't care about people that look at the car that I drive
Status.
and see it as being an importance for my job. Like the car that I drive is to get me from point A to point B. It does shouldn't equate in the value of my position within the company or my actual worth. But when you look at it from a state of life perspective, it's like, no, that's not the case. State of life people will also rather talk with somebody who's properly and well dressed because for them being well dressed is part of the excellence
Yeah, but it's
in the
also
professional work field.
the association that it has created over the years, right? Like what professionalism look like. So it's basically been shaped, been manufactured. Yeah, it's maybe too extensive, but it's basically what's been expected by society as the norm.
Okay. I think that's something we should discuss for a different topic and a different episode of Social Confoes.
Indeed, this has been another fun conversation on a bit philosophizing on the topic of entrepreneurship and where the work for yourself dream comes from, which we actually didn't go too much into the. Actually, we covered quite a lot now that I think about it. Yeah. So for the people who tuned in, thanks for tuning in. As a reminder, we're on Instagram now at Confoes, Confoes, and also subscribe to our YouTube for the weekly notification when we go live. And as always, the audio versions will be published on the websites at the end of the month. Any final thoughts and close it up, Jean-Luc?
It was another fun episode. For those of you tune in live, thank you for tuning in live. For those who are listening to the recordings, thank you for choosing your time and spending your time with us. This has been Social Confos. We'll be here back next week, same place, same time. Bye bye.